So, I'm going to start by saying that language is a way of thinking, and thinking is specifically bound to language. An example I will use is in the English language, we don't have the word déjà vu. So when we want to talk about the concept déjà vu, we borrow the French word, and everyone in America, for example, knows the word. Britain is probably as well. It's became part of the English language. But I would argue that if you didn't have the word, déjà vu, you would not be able to talk eloquently about that feeling and that concept. You wouldn't be able to share your experience in life with the feeling of déjà vu without going into a diatribe about what it means, right? Describing it in long, verbose context. And so the language itself allows you to think in a certain way, allows you to express yourself in a certain way because of the language. Some languages are just better at expressing some kinds of concepts. Another example of this would be if you wanted to look at my budget for my family, I could describe to you my budget and how things work and how I get paid and what I pay for my rent and all of that. But a better way for me to do that would be just to take an Excel document and give it to you, right? And you'd see that and be like, okay, I know what's going on. Because there's a better way to deal with numbers, right? There's a better way to think about budgets, and that's Excel documents or spreadsheets. And so that kind of concept is a big part of how I think about communication and about development. In the early years of the web development, when I was learning to code, I was doing a lot of view source with Netscape Navigator, right? And seeing how HTML worked and figuring it out from there. I think a lot of people learned how to code that way in the web, and samples of JavaScript, for example. And at the time, all the dialogue that happened was about whether the HTML elements were nested. We had an amateurish quality about HTML at that point. We, as a society, didn't know the language. We didn't have a society that knew the language. And so when we started talking about HTML, it was about grammar. It was about like a young child talks about language, where they can kind of speak appropriately, but sometimes they have grammatical errors and you have to fix it. And then sometimes when they write, they don't have the punctuation. But I argue that what we started doing at that time was everything we did around HTML was judged whether it would just render, right? It was just whether Netscape would make it look the way we were thinking. And until we got good at understanding the language, that's how we thought. That's how we tested the code that we were writing. And that way of thinking puts the computer as the goal for the language. That's not right. Because programming languages are made for us, right? It is a way for us to express our way of thinking in a new language in the programming environment. And so we have to always think that way, that the tools, the languages that we use are for our human brains, and there's a very complicated translation layer to the machine code that we've abstracted now in our society, so we can think more deep thoughts about programming. So what is programming? If we use this metaphor of language and programming, a program is really just a story that we say in this new language we're efficient with. The first times I was writing stories in programming was doing form validation. Well, that's not true, but yeah, we'll go with this. Doing form validation on web pages, right? I was grabbing some JavaScript code from somewhere, some view source someplace, Grease Monkey or something, and I was throwing it onto a page and then trying to tell the story with a language I didn't know. And so it was kind of broken, and I'd test it against the computer, and if the computer ran it, it worked. And I would think, that's good code. And that's not good code. Because good code is a story written by an expert in the language, right? They're using that language at an expertise level, and that's good code. And it's almost like the code itself is poetry. Good, clean code is poetry. It is, sure, you can express it in other ways. You can be verbose and kind of complicated and wrong in the language, not use it efficiently, like a child can tell you a story of their dream. But if you read that, you'll go insane, right? It's just too dense and horrible. As web developer society grew up and doing this, at one point along came WYSIWYG editors. And I think that yesterday, Christina closed her CSS talk with a quote of, auto-generated code kinda sucks. And why is it that we have, like, I hated Dreamweaver, right? Because every time I looked at the source of it, it just drove me insane, right? It was this grammatical crap. And the reason that is that it's very hard, of course, to generate good stories, good poetry, right? That's an art form. And that poetry and writing good code is kind of like that. It is something that a human can do, and when we try to augment that with a translation layer of a visual dragging a box and changing some font size into code, you get code that the computer will run, but is not poetic. But there's an interesting side effect of this, because when you use a WYSIWYG editor, you are thinking a certain way. You're using a different type of language, a gestural type of language, a different way of thinking of how to communicate. Really, when I'm coding CSS and I want a size of a box, I'm not typing that exactly what that box size is not the way I'm thinking about the box, right? So the WYSIWYG editor actually does a really interesting thing for you. It kind of translates how you think about the visualized experience into really crappy code. So there's always this pass-off that always frustrates me. But to keep in mind that it's because you've moved into a different language and using that as primary. Now, to step back real quick about computers. If you design, of course, I mean, a computer can run minified code. That's another example of just horrible, horrible code. And if you understand that the goal is not for the computer to work, the goal is for you to have good code, or for more specifically, for you to be able to communicate well in the primary language, whatever that is. And I think in a visual environment, it's probably, you know, a tool like Photoshop, right? It is that as fast as you can get visually. All right. So my name's Lyle Troxell. I'm a developer advocate for Wakanda. That means that I want to talk with you guys, and then I talk with the developers, and I try to bring them together. It's kind of like it's kind of like evangelist, but a lot less religious. So that's good. And I live in California. I actually live in Santa Cruz, which is a beach town. I do a radio show called Geek Speak. I've been doing it for years. I live up in the mountains with my family in a redwood forest with flowers and beautifulness and giant redwood trees. And I raise chickens. Yeah, chickens. And like, do we have sound? We don't have sound. Yeah, that was me laying like face down with glass on my face recording them. So why the hell am I talking about chickens? The reason is I actually kind of want to talk to you about relational data, because the reason you want to interact with Wakanda is relational data. If you are in an environment where you need to have multiple table relationships. So how do you think about relational data? How do we do it? How do we actually conceptualize it? I mean, you could argue that you do it that way. And I would say, no, you don't think in SQL. I think that we think in querying, in selecting stuff, we think in SQL. I think all of us do that. In how to get stuff out of the system, I think, oh, so, you know, select and a join, and I kind of do that translation. But what I'm really thinking about is not that. In fact, this is a querying language, right? It's not a definition language. How do you actually define a data model, like multiple tables? And the way I always do that is, no, my picture's not here. Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, like that. I draw on notepads, you know, UML charts and map things together and many relationships. And I have journals and journals over the years of just, normally it's darker and a lot smaller than this. I did this last night for a slide to show that's how I think about it. I conceptualize into objects and I make the relational objects, and that's how it's done. Visually. Anybody else do like data modeling, the first steps, any other way? Okay, so that's kind of the way it happens, right? Okay, so let's take a look at Wakanda. So I have that model actually open in Wakanda. Oh, that's one file. Screen resolution presentations, always a charm. Hey, look, it looks just like my drawing. Oh, you can't see it. Sorry. Let's get out of display mode. Or mirror mode, there we go. Oh, good. Now it's even smaller. Lovely. All right. I am running a beta version of our most recent, which is probably really stupid. I'll let it be like that. You can kind of imagine the rest of that table. So so basically, this WYSIWYG editor, the data modeler, is the interface you use to create models, which become tables, another way of thinking about that, in Wakanda. And this is actually spitting out something that's actually more code-based and relatively clean. I'll get to that in a second. But let me just show you. Wow, this is very difficult to do this in that side screen. You know, that's actually a little viewer of the. I'll just do that. But I want to actually do a new page real quick just to show you what's going on. I'll call it. I should dance or something while I'm up here waiting for that to happen. It should. And what we'll do is we'll load our widget set on our system. So that data model right now is propagated with we have a client with jQuery UI to do widget to binding, and we have some models, and I'll get to in a second how this actually works. But what's happening here is these widgets on this page are actually binding to local data models and then proxying to the server the data. So you can see that I've got 900 coops over here, or chickens, excuse me. I've got 100 coops. And if I go through my breeds of that relationship we were just looking at and select like a different breed, you'll notice that the birds actually redraw. You'll also notice that right now I don't actually have 937 DOM objects for those chickens. I actually have more like 60, and there's paging happening. So if I go into network and I scroll this this beast, as I scroll this thing, and it's relatively fluidly loading them in, you'll see that here's the REST request happening down here. So when we define that data model in Wakanda, and the server boots up, the REST API gets generated automatically. And then in the studio, which of course is not functioning right now very well, there's the page finally, all the data models, you see the data models over on the side here, address, breed, chicken, coop, and so on. And I can go ahead and take one of these and drop them down, and we have a bunch of widget sets. So this is what our studio is so good at. And then this, that's as fast as it need to get data up. And this is editable as well, right? So the REST API gets built automatically, our widgets automatically build them and bind to them. But it is our widget set, right? And as I was talking about that feeling of poetry when writing code, it's very difficult to move in your environment of what you're comfortable in to be, because of course, your editor, for example, whatever editor you use, you have a fluidity about that. And if I say, no, do it this way in a different editor, you lose that ability to communicate effectively. And so though we have this really cool set and it's really great for mocking up, I'd say it's a great way to mock up and actually have users start entering data into the system. My goal here was to say Wakanda is actually more than that. It's just the server that you can then build on top of, and we're looking for people to build on top of. So for today's talk, I actually wanted to show you using some other frameworks with Wakanda and what it looks like in the code. So let me get back to my slides very quickly. So that clearly, it's very easy to move. You drag and drop it, you add attributes. I'll do that. I'll do some in a little bit. You can also do it with code. What the actual schema is of the database, that editor that you're using is actually producing JSON, and it looks like that, right? Pretty clear JSON documents. You can see where, I don't think I have a relationship in here. Do I have a relationship? No, I don't have a relationship type. But a relationship type basically names the other type. It's pretty simple. And so that's a relatively, any questions about that? Okay, so the server boots up, it loads that. And then you can also extend it. In fact, that's how we do calculated values. So if you want to do a calculated value, you do an on get to that attribute name, and do a function. So every time the server does a request for that attribute, you're actually doing JavaScript on the server side. Okay, so Wakanda, it's that web application framework that's the widget set, but also a data model or proxy. And there's a complexity in the data model. You notice that I had multiple data models on the client, and one of them was bound to another. That's kind of out of the box. You do that very easily by saying, I want this source, which is what we call it on the client side. And if you want a related source, another data model on the server that's related to the primary source, you just use the attribute name that is the relation. So for chickens, each chicken has a coop. If I want to put the chickens up and I want to have the related coop, I just put up chickens, I make that the name of the source, a variable on the client side, and then .coop is the other source, and now they're bound. And that's all taken care of for you. And so that's the framework. And this is kind of how we're doing that. We've got two different objects on the client side that we load. The source is the one I just described, which is actually kind of multiple instances of them with different kind of found sets from the server. So if you ever dealt with like business applications, a concept of a found set and a current selected record, we use that terminology in the way of dealing with this. So you always have a current record. When I selected one of those chickens, that concept of that collection has a current selection. And so you can step through those selections, and all of that is indexed on the server and cached in the session you're in. There is indexes built all the time for you. So the server binding is really close. I'll talk a little bit more of that later. Then we also have this data source. We call it a data DS. It's a global object on the client side. And what that is the actual class interfaces to the data binding. So that's the thing that actually does the REST APIs. And it has no state necessarily. You actually pull stuff through it. And of course, the REST API. Now, the other thing is that we actually, our client JavaScript library actually loads the information from Wakanda, what actual availability is there. So I'll show you that in a little bit, but we can actually query the system to find out what the catalog looks like. So then we also have the Studio. It's a data modeler that spits out JSON. It's an IDE, and it starts and stops Wakanda. It's like an admin interface. And then WakandaDB is a lot of things, but I'm just going to put all these things out here. It's a database primarily. It's a multi-threaded database. We have WebKit JavaScript instances on the server that we hold in a pool, and all the JavaScript code gets processed through those, and we hold a pool of them for speed. It's multi-threaded, so you can spawn workers, and creating a worker has the same syntax as in the browser with workers. Anything that we can do that's similar to the browser, we do on the server. So the storage API of the browser is on the server, right? So you're very comfortable in that environment. The object relationals really look like classes. You'll see a little bit of them to some degree. Everything's JavaScript objects, of course. It's indexed, it's transactional. And the thing that people always ask at this point when I chat about Wakanda is, like, whoa, who made the database? Is it MySQL? No. The company behind this product is 4D, and 4D's been doing, it's a company in Clichy, France. It's been around since 1984. It had a good relationship with Apple before Jobs left. They had a contract to be the database provider for Apple, and Jobs got kicked out, and that contract got terminated, and so we have FileMaker in that space to some degree. So that's the history of 4D. 4D's been around, very successful in making business development applications for data-rich applications. There's a lot of applications out there that are written. These are proprietary, compiled business applications. Hotel check-in systems, energy management systems, that kind of thing. So the web server and the database server, we extend through using AMD concept, right? We have a require.js concept happening on the server side, so when the server boots, it takes care of that for you. It feels really like good JavaScript. It's awesome. And just to be clear, when you set an attribute value of a JavaScript object, the memory space that you're actually accessing is the C++ environment. So it is the database environment. So it's actually the cache level of the database. So there is no web server database communication layer. It's the same memory space. It gives you affordance of making indexes very fast and not even thinking about whether what you're doing is efficient or not. You're in the database. You can kind of think of it like Apache smashed up with PostgreSQL, and you're coding in stored procedures, right? It's like right in that environment. It's just that it's in JavaScript, so you're not going to go insane. Okay, so let me show you what. Show you. Let's see. Step through that. There we go. All right. So right now I'm going to step into I'm using Dojo for this example. Most of my example today is in Dojo. And does anyone remember how to get rid of that? No. No! That was foolish. So I'm loading Dojo locally, and I'm configuring it here, and you can't see that. All right. Who here has done any Dojo work? Okay, a little bit. I mean, some experts, of course. What's going on in the HTML here is there's actually an element that I'm actually binding a data grid to. And in my source for this page, my JavaScript space, what's happening is the WAF is a global object that I'm loading with our toolkit. It's going to give us something else in a second to look at. And then this is going to be an on DOM ready, basically. So we're going to initiate Dojo at that point. And let me see if I can get rid of. That's better. So Dojo uses require too. It's a very beautiful. I've been dealing with it for the last 3 days, just kind of writing this up, and I'm kind of falling in love with Dojo. It's got some great stuff for a client framework. I highly recommend, if you haven't played with it, I highly recommend playing with it. It's quite good. In any case, what's going on here is I'm producing a local array of objects that are some chickens, and I'm then creating a memory type store in Dojo. Dojo's got this concept of store, which is like a model on the client side. There's a few different types. Memory basically means you refresh the page, it's gone, right? It's just that space. And I'm extending with observable. Observable just gives you bindings for triggering events off of a store's change. I think that's right. And then I'm making a on-demand grid, which is a grid that can listen to a observable data store. So as the data store changes, the grid will update. And what I'm doing is I'm defining the columns here. These names right here are the attribute names inside that object I created, the list of objects. That's the same names. You see that? And I start it up. So that's pretty much all there is to it. And that generates this. And you can take a peek at what's happening here. That data store has that object that we created, right? It's as simple as that. And if we get one of these things, we got to give it the primary key. I can just do this. So little bon is that primary key of the first one. And of course, I can I'll use my daughter's name. And then I just have to fire an event to grid to update it. And Gwendolyn's now the name checking name, right? So that's the basic concept of what's happening. Local model, some attribute that needs an event to be fired. I change attributes, I fire the event. Yeah?
Isn't there an API already in Chrome that basically fires these events? Isn't the observable store tracking this?
Oh, so the way I've actually set this up.
You actually fired the event by hand, that's what I'm wondering.
Yes, yeah. I didn't build out the infrastructure on this because I wanted to show you a bit of what's happening in the code level. But I think also if I didn't set the attribute that way, if I'd used one of the methods of the store to set the attribute, it would have fired the event for me. But instead, I'm like accessing the actual data object and hitting it. Okay, so neat, great. It's not, we refresh this page and data gone, right? Okay, so let's talk a bit about the REST API of Wakanda. So what's happening for us is we have a pretty thorough REST API, and we can actually query the catalog or the schema of the system by passing this URL and find out what the objects are. And you can actually take a look at any of the objects more specifically if you want, or all of them. to see all the attributes available to you. So once you've got the Wakanda server running your model, everything else from there upon, you're just doing client side, right? You just have to know the infrastructure to some degree. We do have some oddity about how we interact with items. So, I mean, I should say oddity. You know, there's no actual defined type of REST. There's no like legal definition of what a REST protocol looks like. It's a methodology and a concept, and like it's if you think of the first the definition of the term, it's actually more a philosophical paper. There's actually, I think, right after my talk, there's more talks about REST. How long do we have today? Keep track of that. All right. So you'll see that right here to get like to get chicken number 1, I actually pass it this structure. So it looks like a method call. Instead of a /1, that's our structure. So in doing that, one of the stores that Dojo had is actually called the REST store. And I couldn't use it directly. I had to extend it. So I went ahead and made a Wakanda REST store and overloaded the methods that I needed to change. And it's very, it's very simple. I actually extended it to give some more ability, like a different type of filtering and such, and expanding out. So that I'll have that available later on at WakandaDB.org if you're curious about that and want to use the module. It's not done, as open source always is, right? So this is what it looks like to use this structure. I'm passing it a target REST path. That's our path for chicken, for example. So this data store is going to be accessing my chicken model. And then I pass it some general search features. I'm going to only go for gender females, and I'm also going to start it at page 10, the 10th chicken down, if you will, of 10 at a time. So that's pagination. And this was actually really easy to build with Wakanda because the API, the REST API is so simple to interact with. And then after I get the results, I store it in a new memory store, and I pass in the chickens. The ID that we use is actually ID, uppercase. So that was necessary to do posts and gets to actually specify which the index field was in the unique field on the data model. And then create the grid, and then the rest of it's just exactly the same as the memory object. In fact, it's very similar. So again, we can load this puppy up. And there's our first 10 chickens. And the interface, of course, to edit them is exactly the same in JavaScript. And again, I'm doing this in JavaScript because you, as web developers, have your framework you need. This is the language that we talk about, right? So that's why I'm doing this in Chrome. And I don't know if you guys can see the code. Let me get a little bigger. So I just got that first object. That's Annabelle. It's in the database. And I can change our name, of course. And I need to do a couple things to our model. We actually have related models that are being generated back, and they're not expanded out. And if I send them back with this request, it'll actually create new subrelationships, right? So if I resubmit this, the mapping's not finished, so that if I did that, this chicken would have a brand new coop and a brand new breed, and I haven't set up my server logic to make sure that that doesn't happen, but more importantly, that those can't be created with nulls, and they did before. So what we're doing is we're deleting those attributes from our local collection. We have a local JavaScript object, and we're just deleting those 2 attributes from it. And that way, what it looks like now is exactly what we want to post to the server with a slight change. There's an ID. There's a couple other fields we use for indexing and such. There's an ID of 11. It's now named Gwendolyn. And because that ID exists, and that's our primary key in the system, when I then call my chicken model, and this is the Wakanda bound data store, right? So it's a REST data store on Dojo. When I call that and I do update, and our chicken, no. Put. Sorry. It's no SQL, not update. And then all I got to do is, again, refresh. Now, the server, of course, has already done this. And then we refresh, and we have Gwendolyn. Now you notice that we're having, and it looks like I didn't delete breed, so we've got a null in there probably. Not so important. But you notice all the objects in there that say object, object, object instead of breed name? The reason that's happening is that on my simple model, I just wanted the breed attribute. But when I bound it out into a data model, I'm like, well, I'm going to reuse the breeds, right? And breeds have attributes like egg color that follows the breed along. In chickens, that's how it works. So it made more sense to do a separate model and not have just a string, and therefore I put an ID in. But of course, the way the REST API works, I'm just getting an ID back, and it's actually looking, it's an object. So if I look at the chicken example, we can actually look at number 11. There's Gwendolyn. You'll see that there's a coop and a breed object, and that's the related object. And you see that there's an expansion URI. If you want that object, you just grab that URI, right? So I can go look at the breed that she is, and it looks like, oh, the coop, sorry. I could look at the breed she is and find out what she is. Now, there's two ways I could handle this at this point. I could go ahead and have the REST server expand out those values so that I had them available in the JavaScript object on the client side. So the way I would do that is I would, okay, I'll try to remember it. I've got Alexander here to help, so that's good. Yeah. So now the breed's expanded. You see that? Now we have the breed ID, but we also have the breed name. That's what we want to put in there. Gwendolyn's a Polish type chicken. And so I can also expand out. I can see that this breed has all the birds associated with it as well. So I can expand out that as well. It might be a lot, but let's try that. By just referencing its path like that. So now this one chicken, Gwendolyn, there's the breed she is, Polish, and there are all the Polish breed chickens in the system. And we can keep doing that. But at some point our client will explode because it can't hold the values. Oh yeah, oh sorry, yeah, sorry, that's right. I'm not dealing with I'm not talking about pagination. So there's not that many birds. So it's actually only 24. You can see the count under Polish right in here. There's only 24 birds of that size. And we're grabbing the first 24. Our default, I think, is 60. I mean, it's 40. So and the same thing happens here for chicken. You'll see that there's 937 chickens in the system, but I'm only grabbing the first 100. I think we need a lot more coops. So let's generate some coops. So get back to my record. Here we go. Now there's 58,000 chickens, and we're only getting the first 100. Okay, getting back to how to deal with this issue of having that page render the correct thing before I run out of time. So two ways to do it. I can expand it, and I actually did carry out that. I can actually get the expansion in there. Let me get my sample code. And let me show you a few things that we can do with this REST API. For example, I'm just going to do the code all in one line. This is the chicken model. I'm querying it. I can do search parameters with actually a splat because our system supports that. That's an indexed value, so you can do searching. If you use a splat, it means all of them. So I can say Gwen, for example, all the birds named that. I'm also sorting by the age attribute. I'm expanding the breed. You see that expand breed? That will actually give me back the object with all of it in there. And so I'll hit that. Oh, great. No idea why. Great. Not time to debug. What's that? Well, I could do that. I'm not using that. I'm not using our local object. I think we might have to skip ahead to other things. Ah, I know what's going on. The issue is that I did make a null bird. No. Yeah, okay. I'm not going to try to debug this right now. I think that would be insane. So what I'll do is explain that this was working great earlier and move along. I gotta at least show one of them happen.
Yeah, the first parent article is
Yeah, you have
that's
a bracket,
for
closing bracket, which is
that's it. And you have to remove another one.
yeah, you have to remove a closing
Thank you. Let me see if this works. Anybody else? No, I think it has something to do with the model on the server side being messed up. Yeah. It was in here earlier. See how well Chrome does. Hey, look at that, found one. So, all right, so those are all the birds of Gwen type or Gwen names. And the sorting, of course, right now is on name, but of course I can do that on age as well. And as I do that, and of course I can do descending and all those things too. So everything you normally will do is already now in the standard protocol for Dojo's store, right? So if you've got Dojo working and you want to throw in a back end that's not as complex as the solutions that are out there, there you go. And update works the same way. Now the object thing. So one way to do it is to just expand that out. As Lyle tries. Okay, expand breed. Okay, so breed's expanded, which means that if I go back into my code and actually edit it, I can take a look at seeing if the breed is there. And it's going to be the syntax we'd all expect it to be. I don't know if this actually works. No. So the way to do that would actually work to grab that attribute. So let's instead change the value on the server. And we'll just step into the server-side code to edit this. So if I go back to my model, you'll notice that I've got all these different values. I'm going to actually do this in TextMate because I dig TextMate. I have this file here that defines extra attributes I've added in JavaScript. So there's two ways to do this. You can do a JSON document with the WYSIWYG editor that we've got that generates the data modeler, or you can just do it in code. And so I'll just kind of copy that age one, which is a calculated value. I'll make it string, breed, name, and I'll make an onGet method for breed, oops, name, and all I got to do is return this.breed.name. Everybody see how that works? The onGet's going to be fired anytime the server tries to get the value. The calculation happens. So then all I've got to do is change this guy to breed name, right? To match what the new attribute is. Now I got to go into our server, and because I'm running the future version that's not ready yet, I can't just push a reload. I have to actually stop the server and start it again, but it only takes a second to do that. Oh, notice that breed name is now in the model in there, and it's a calculated value. So this thing's actually going to read through your source code and actually process it out and generate that back up. So in fact, address, which is not even shown up on this page right now, is actually loaded by AMD with a require. And I just require an entire model, and boom, it shows up. This source code, of course, is available on GitHub. So there you go. There's breed calculated from the server. Okay, that's kind of wraps up that part of it. Let's jump back to my slides and see what else I've got to talk about.
could have done an alias too.
What's that?
Because the breed name, you could have done an alias attribute.
Yes, I could also do an alias attribute. Another way to do it, just to map it over. So, you know what? I'm running out of time, so I'm going to step through that the idea here about the clean code is that it's not that generated code is always bad. It's that when we think of what our goal is to make poetry, generated code is not necessarily the way to do it. But when you want to do rapid development, when you want to think in a different way, like a data modeler, or if you want to just think about stuff at a higher level, it's nice to have a language that can do that well for you, a tool set that can do that well for you. I highly recommend that when you think of the project, you think about the kind of communication you want to be doing with your system. If you want to be doing it in such a way that it works at a different way of speaking, a different way of communicating, like a visual way, grab something that's visual to do that with. If you want to be deep down into the poetry of making sure it's clean, be in a code editor. Think about the tool set, not necessarily just generated code is crap. That's not the case. It's a translation issue. We're wearing these shirts. We're giving some of these shirts away. We do 2 shows. We're doing one on October 25th, and it's at an awesome venue. This is the location. It's on Treasure Island in San Francisco, between San Francisco and Oakland. That's the Bay Bridge there. And so you land on this island, and there's like only a few things there. This is a shot from like above on the hillside. You see that big white building? That's from like the World's Fair when San Francisco held it, I'm not sure what time. And then those warehouses, those used to be Pan Am airline hangars, and then they were taken over by the US government for World War II to make planes on this location. And one of those hangars, it's the one that says winery, is a winery, and it's got this really cool big room. And so on October 25th, we're going to fill that with like 200 JavaScript developers, and we're going to talk about code. 1 track, 1 day, all in the same room, all sitting down. You don't have to travel anywhere. You don't have to miss anything. And we're going to make it really good. So I need your help because I'm looking for talks. Now, we might not select you to come to and pay for your whole trip over to California, but we're doing a show in February as well in Paris. And so if you're out here and you submit for this talk and we don't select you for that, we'll probably go, hey, let's put on that one. So please do think of submitting a talk to this show. It's going to be great, right? Wine tasting, the whole deal. Okay, so jseverywhere.org. We need sponsors. We need submissions for talks. And of course, you can buy tickets now if you'd like. It's cheap, too. Okay, questions, comments? Nada? I'd love, if you have any questions about Wakanda, like the goal for Alexander and I is to talk with you and help spread the word about Wakanda. It's an amazing good system. When I talk with the lead developer, who's a database administrator, a database designer, Laurent, he started the company in '84. He's a very smart man, and it is just a joy to talk about outside my knowledge space. I've always thought of databases as a black box, and I don't even know what's going on. But when you talk with him and you learn what a database actually is and how it works, it's really kind of a fun space to be in. I'm about to do that for a week, and I'm looking forward to it. I also want to just say thank you. And especially thanks to Tom. Somebody was drunk. Tom yesterday helped me out a lot with Dojo. So thank you very much. Please try Wakanda.